Welcome, everybody, to the latest edition of the Coaching Outdoors podcast. Today, we are joined by the inimitable Jackee Holder. I will ask Jackee to introduce herself.
Well, it's so good to be here. I love Coaching Outdoors podcasts. And, when you have certain wishes to be with your tribe, this would be one that I have always wished and wanted to be with. So it's great to be here today. I am a coach supervisor, but I would describe myself way beyond that. I'm a human being who loves to support people to really connect to their true selves, whether that is through connecting to their passions, to their creativity, to what makes their heart sing. And one of the ways that I do that and what brings me alive is through bringing in the power of connecting with nature and the power of journal writing into almost every single aspect of the work that I do as a coach and coach supervisor. And so that's really how I would describe myself. I work a lot in the corporate sector, do a lot of work in the NHS. I work a lot in financial services sectors, doing a lot around leadership. But at the heart of that work is the kind of core principles of reconnecting to self through nature and through journaling.
Thank you for that brief intro, and we have got time to go deeper into different segments of your work and your life. But kickstarting with our classic tried and tested question that you probably will have heard, and I'm sure our listeners are well aware of. What is your earliest memory of being outdoors? And it is a two-parter, so remember the second part as well. And why do you love the outdoors so much? So what is your earliest memory of being outdoors, and why do you love the outdoors so much?
Well, that question is a question that I love to hear other people answer. And I have answered that question a lot on many podcasts. And it was interesting because whenever I'm preparing for a podcast, I'm always preparing from the season of life that I'm in. Just like the four seasons happens out in nature, and we use that as a really strong metaphor. I noticed that when I was preparing for today's podcast, that I connected with a really visceral memory that is different to what I normally say to on other podcasts about my earliest memories about being outside. So I'm going to go back to the early 1960s. My mum and dad came over from the Caribbean island of Barbados in 1959. And then in 1961, my mum came and joined my dad. And my very earliest memory, which is a very visceral one, I can almost imagine myself in the clothes I was wearing, ankle socks, black patent shoes, holding my dad's hand, standing behind his olive green Morris minor car, I think it was. It was just such a beautiful color, and ironic, it was the color green. It is a blazing hot day, and we are at Littlehampton by the seaside. We're enjoying a picnic out of the back of the car. My dad is surrounded by lots of his friends. They've all come down, they've all driven down in different cars, and I'm about 5 years old. And that memory really stays with me because what happened later on that afternoon was I got lost. I must have been running around and playing, got disconnected from my dad and got lost for about an hour, and a couple found me. And I just remember walking around this car park, knowing that the sea was just on the other side, seeing all of these cars with people sitting in deck chairs and just out on a hot summer's day in Littlehampton. And so actually, that is one of my very earliest memories of being outdoors, because at the time, our family was living in a really tall, sort of Victorian house on a very tiny street in Camberwell in South London. back in the 1960s, Caribbean families often rented rooms in houses. And so our family had the top bedroom, which was really, really long and wide. But what I remember most about that house was it had a tiny back garden with not a plant in sight. It was just a bare yard. And so what that connected me with was that our family often went out. And of course, my family have come from the Caribbean. So the sea would feel like a natural pull, a natural call for them to go to. And what transpired during my childhood was that we actually visited almost every seaside on the South Coast. But I know every seaside. You know, I've got visual memories of every seaside. And because I grew up in the Black Pentecostal church, every summer we would have this big coach trip out to a seaside. So we would go Blackpool, Great Yarmouth, you know, just everywhere, and have these amazing day trips out at the sea where, you know, we would go off to the fun fair, we'd go down to the sea. So actually, those were my earliest memories of being outdoors, which I hadn't quite connected in, because I often talk about the big playing fields behind our house, a family house that I grew up in, where I would just go out and play by myself during the summer holidays. And I often cite that as my earliest memories, but actually it's just changed.
Just it is visceral, just your description of that, even down to the Morris Minor. My dad was a big car fanatic, so there were Morris Minors in our past as well, especially green ones, bottle green ones. It was the colour, wasn't it?
Yeah.
British racing green, I think they called it. And it's lovely to hear as well that the connection there with bluespace as well, because of your heritage, because of your family's kind of, like you said, the natural pull of the sea, and the blue spaces, and visiting all of the different beaches and seasides in the south. That pull must have been really, really strong to sort of seek out the sea. And yes, we're on an island as well, but some parts of our coastline are gorgeous, other parts are not quite so nice. So it's it's a bit hit and miss, isn't it? I think whether you find somewhere beautiful or not. And thinking then about sort of more into the green space. So for those of you who are listening, not watching, Jackie's got a gorgeous image behind her on her screen, and I believe it's an oak tree. Is that correct?
It
It is
is
an oak tree.
oak tree,
Um,
yeah.
and people who will have listened to previous podcasts know that Anna Marie and I both have a very strong pull towards trees, especially oak trees. So you obviously have a very deep and a sort of long-term connection with nature, trees and tree mythology especially. Where did that come from, and how has it evolved?
That's a really good question. And I often like think to myself, where do I start with my journey with the trees? And I'll go right back to a memory when I was about 7 or 8. Mum used to pack us off with packed lunches during the summer holidays and send us to the park. And at the time, on this particular day, I had to trail behind my older brothers. It wasn't cool for them. Do you know what I mean? They did not want to take their younger sister to the park. So as soon as we got to the park gates, they all scarpered in every direction over to the football pitch. And I was left to kind of wander. I was in their sight line, but I was literally left dragging my doll behind me to wander. And I was just amazed. I was just looking up at all these trees. So it was a park called Norwood Park, which is where we lived in South London. Now, Norwood was was the region of South London that was once covered by the Great North Wood. So if you think about the names of the area that I grew up in, Norwood, South Norwood, West Norwood, Honor Oak, Penn, Sydenham, they're all names that connected to the earth and the land. So here I was in Norwood Park, and I was totally taken in by the huge beech trees, because I've actually researched this. I've actually researched what trees would have been around in the park at that time. There's lots of plane trees in West Norwood when I grew up. And I remember just being completely memorized by these trees. Yeah. So that's the first earliest memory. Fast forward, like, you know, my childhood growing up, like I described, bluespace was, you know, a big frame for me in terms of connection to nature. I was working in the London Borough of Southwark, and I'd gone out to lunch one day with a friend, and we had sat under a particular tree in this park. It was a really small tree, but it had a lot of presence. I remember it was really curly and twisty, and it just looked like a really interesting tree. And it was tall enough that we could sit down under it, and we got a lot of shade under that tree. We had a lovely conversation. And then as I was getting up, there was a plaque right next door to the tree, and it said, this tree is named an elder tree, and it is a name given to, it is based on the legend that witches would escape persecution in the Middle Ages by turning themselves into elder trees. Now, I loved history, and like seeing that plaque by the tree, and I also worked in a women's unit at the time, I was like, hold on a minute, this is really, really interesting. So I wrote down what was the quote on the plaque by the side, left it on my desk, and I noticed that it sort of piqued my interest again in trees and nature. I lived in a very leafy part of South London. Brockwell Park was very close by. I was also running lots of retreats for women of colour at that time, and we would often go out into the park and do a whole ceremony and ritual under these huge towering oak trees and plane trees that used to be in Brockwell Park. So it really just piqued my curiosity. I then read a book, which was a very pivotal book in my life, called Tree Wisdom by Jackee Patterson. It's a beautiful book around the legends and the mythology around trees. And at the same time, I was going through a kind of transformation in terms of I wanted to change my name. I wanted to take on a name that had more meaning to my African ancestry. So I was really exploring different names. And I was really wanting to let go of the name Holder, which felt like it just kind of held on. That was my, you know, my family surname. It felt like it held on to a lot of energy. So all of this was happening around the same time as me writing my first book, Soul Purpose. And so what happened was one day I was in the final legs of editing my book, Soul Purpose. And I went into a local library, and the seat that I normally sit in, somebody else was sitting there. So I sat somewhere else. And in my break, I turned behind me, and there was a book of names, the meaning of names. Now, I thought it was a book of names of first names. But when I opened the book, it was a book of surnames. And so I thought the name Holder certainly is not going to be in this book. And when I looked up the name Holder, I couldn't believe it. It said that the name Holder was a name that is given to people who lived near elder trees. And that moment opened up the heavens for me in terms of recognition of how much nature meant to me, how much trees impacted my well-being and grounded me and anchored me. And I also realized that my primary school was on Elder Road. I mean, you can't make this up, can you? And so that really was the springboard for my reconnection back into nature. Because once I bought Tree Wisdom, I started to notice trees everywhere. I was also a runner. So I would often run around my local park. And perhaps that's another story I could tell you, or unless you want to go to another question. But there was a tree that I adopted in Brockwell Park called Sanctuary, and a kind of a very mature oak tree that became very pivotal in my life as well.
Mm. Just loving the little serendipitous moments that you stumble across in life when you are
Yeah.
conscious, because
No,
sometimes we can miss them, but when we're just there and present and in the moment, they're just like a breadcrumb trail leading us and connecting that
absolutely.
back to you, to your sole purpose, the
Yeah.
book that you were writing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is that thing for me about being in nature is it's often where I feel I get really present with myself. It's where I can hear myself, where I can listen to myself, where I feel like I put bits of myself back together again. Nature always writes me. Whether I'm walking in rain, I love to walk in the rain. I have run across Battersea Bridge in pouring snow and ice, and someone say to me, please kind of slow down. Do you know what I mean? But there was such a confidence for me in my body and being out in nature that it's almost like I back back when I started running and then when I started walking, it's like nature was a place where I felt like I could really connect much more fully to all of myself, my whole self, not just my professional self or my personal self or my spiritual self or my reading self, but it's like I would come into my fullness when I'm out in nature, especially when I'm amongst the trees. I think trees are a bit of an archetype. I think I come from a background of complex childhood trauma. So I feel like I'm always looking for archetypes. And trees are I love the silence that is around the atmosphere of certain trees that allows me to listen. If you look at the word silent, it actually has the word listen in it. And I feel like I bring those two things, allow the quiet leadership part of me to really come alive.
And really leaning into the now and the work that you do with your clients. It would be interesting just to segue a little bit
Yeah.
there, and how you incorporate nature into your coaching, your supervision, your facilitation, and stories, examples which you're weaving and bewitching us with as it is would be we'd love to hear.
Well, as I shared at the beginning, I feel like nature plays a really pivotal role in the work that I do with my clients. And I'll tell you why. When I first started running workshops and around nature kind of inspired journaling prompts, I often found that the moment I started to bring in nature into the conversation, that's where it was almost like it was the normalizer. Do you know what I mean? It crossed race, it crossed class, it crossed background. And it allowed people to be really natural. And of course, as coaches and supervisors, we're wanting, that's the place we want our clients to get to. The place where they are natural, where they are whole, where they are fully themselves. So what I would do is I'd often have a few kind of nature inspired prompts around, kind of nature kinds of journaling questions that I would ask a client. So I'd get clients to tell me about, what's their favorite place in nature. For some it would be blue sky, for some it would be blue zones like the sea, for some it would be the trees, for some it would be their plants, for others it would be their gardens, for some it would be walking. So, and then I used to run these workshops, and I ran a particular workshop, been running it for a good few years now, called Looking for Answers in Different Places. And what I found was the kind of nature inspired prompts, like, for example, what places in nature have shaped you? Or using the metaphor of roots, how do your roots strengthen and nourish you? those kinds of questions enable clients to arrive at different answers than the typical kind of coaching questions we might bring into a coaching or a supervision conversation. So that's what I started to do with my clients. And I found that it took them to places where actually what they did was they found their own answers really gracefully, really naturally. So I worked for 4 years on a on-demand coaching service for GPs. And it was right at the time of us coming out of COVID. It was a service that was set up to support GPs, GP partners, and practice managers in primary care. And they would often arrive at sessions burnt out, exhausted, all of the pressures around COVID. And I would use journaling, nature journaling prompts as a way into the sessions. So I remember one GP arrived at session really having a very difficult time with their daughter who was having some real challenges with her mental health and anxiety, which we know has arisen during COVID. And she was just feeling at her wit's end. She had gone to all kinds of different services to see if she could get some help. But, she's just feeling overwhelmed. And I got her to do some breathing and some grounding in the session, just doing like the 4-part centering breath. And then I said to her, tell me about what do you like to do to unwind? And immediately she said, you know what, I've got a greenhouse in the garden and I haven't been into it for about 6 months. And I know that everything is everywhere. And so she talked to me about her garden, about the greenhouse, and she set herself a little goal of getting out into the greenhouse before our next session. And so when she came back to the next session, she actually did look very different. Like a lot of energy had come into her, not only her face, but her presence. So I just opened up the space and I said, well, tell me how your week has been, what you've done. And she said, oh my God, I got into the greenhouse and I started to repot a lot of the plants that were kind of just here, there, and everywhere. And she said, Jackee, do you know what was really interesting for me? When I started repotting the plants, it's almost like taking them out of their soil, prizing apart the roots. It actually helped me to think about what I needed more of. And one of the things she realized was that she needed more time in her greenhouse. She needed more time for her hands to be in the soil. So just by asking that question, exploring and just being really open about, well, sometimes people don't connect immediately to where those places are. She found her own answers. And that's really at the heart of the work that I'm doing. I want to create spaces where we use nature-inspired prompts so people can arrive at their own answers without me giving those answers. That's one example.
You've really struck home with me on this one because I had to take a break from the podcast for a bit, which is why the wonderful Paul joined us, because I wasn't well. And one of the things that really helped me was gardening and being out in my greenhouse and out in my patio allotment and even what you were saying about feeling the soil in your hands, that grounding of just, feeling the air on your skin and the sun, but also actually getting your hands into soil and actually realizing it's really quite warm. And, you think soil's, could be quite wet and disgusting, but actually it's like you said, it's a very visceral place. And I think if you help people to really understand what's their connection, where is that place that helps them, wherever that is. And as you said, it could be different depending on where they are in their life. Sometimes it might be in the garden, or sometimes it might be up a mountain or wherever. And when you were talking there, it just really brought me back to that time. It wasn't even that long ago, just over a year ago, really. That and you're absolutely right. It's it's reconnecting with that, isn't it? And saying to yourself, where am I happy? Where do I feel well? Start again. from there, go back there and see how it unfolds. And I think it's such a really great question to ask as well. So for anyone who's listening or watching, thinking about those questions and doing that self-coaching, you know, where do I feel happy? Where do I feel connected? What makes me feel good is a really great question to ask ourselves at any time.
But the whole thing around the reconnection, I think, is really important, because
Mm.
I had a nurse midwife who again was feeling really stressed out, and she had a park on her doorstep, and she hadn't been in that for ages, and she started walking around a park. And I also had another executive who worked in financial services who, just by it almost kind of came up. I don't think she was going to share this with me, that she used to escape to Japan. Japan was the place that she loved to go to. And by her telling me about Japan, she was able to make the connection that she had hills and mountains outside of the town where she lived that she never explored, but she always kind of waited until she got to Japan
Mhm.
to do that kind of walking, without recognition that she could do it right on her doorstep. And it was like that light bulb moment, but hold on a minute, I can go hiking here in the UK. And it is about helping people to make those connections.
Mm. That's a really good segue then into our next question. So you're a prolific writer. I mean, I literally encourage anybody who's listening or watching to go onto your website. There's just so much there in terms of your journaling and the books that you've written. But you've also done some other things as well, which is really interesting and unique as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to read this out because I want to make sure I get it right. So you've written writing maps for gardens, parks, and green spaces, looking at kind of where to find those green spaces, maybe in a more of an urban environment like the city, or, you know, being that you're in and near London. Um, what inspired this, and what benefits do you think people get from using it?
Well, all of this has come out of my lived practice of, I used to be, I've started off being a runner, then I became a walker. And it was the walking that really slowed me down and deepened my connection to the nature around me. I still live in London, even though I live on the outskirts of London. And London has over 3,000 parks. It also has been named the first national park city in the world. And we have a lot of blue space as well. A lot of people don't associate nature with the city. So one of the things I wanted to do to sort of really to encourage people to really embrace the environment and the nature that was around them, which means slowing down, and we become more connected to what we call soft focus. There's a lot of research that shows that when we are out in nature, our observation skills become more amplified. And even seeing the color green is very soothing and calming to our nervous system. It impacts our physical, mental, and emotional health and well-being. There's a huge amount of research around it, but I wanted to help people not feel like they were out in nature and it was overwhelming, because I think it can feel overwhelming if being in nature isn't something that you've kind of been consistent with. So what I did was I created, and I don't know if we can, because we're on the video, I don't know if we can see them really. Can you see that well? I created these 12 writing prompts. This one is called Rewilding the Page, the Urban Forest Writing Map. And they focus on kind of 12 kind of environments in nature. For example, there's a prompt around not having to name the actual botanical names of trees, but just naming the different trees that you see. Do you know what I mean? Like you might not know a tree that you walk past every day is an oak tree or a plane tree, but what if you gave that tree a name? Yeah, and you just kind of, or you took a photo of the leaf and you just did a little bit of research on the internet, found out what tree it was. And then you find out more about the trees. It was a way of helping people connect in when they're out in nature. There's another prompt on green prescriptions. I created a PDF around just really inviting people to think about where are the places in nature that energizes them. This all came out of the social prescribing that started to happen about 3-4 years ago, that GPs were also prescribing getting out into nature, going into walk as a health prescription. So in place of medication in some cases, they were saying, look, getting out in nature, walking, these are ways in which you can benefit your health and well-being. So because I love finding resources that create experiential learning experiences. When I'm working with teams, when I'm working with groups, I don't want to just be standing up there talking at people. I want to get them engaged. And I know that sometimes when we don't have a strong relationship with a particular area of our life, we need some stimulus. And I know I do. I've probably got a little bit of dyslexia and ADHD in terms of I'm often doing lots of things at the same time. And I sometimes need help in focusing my energy and staying with one thing. And I wanted to support people with how they could take what they're noticing and what they're observing into journal writing. Having a notebook where they could explore their inner world, their inner thoughts, because I think that's a huge part of the work that we get to do as coaches.
I'd just like to just jump in and just draw an analogy. So connection is the word for me that is really landing. And I've been doing this 6-month immersive program called The Old Way. And at the beginning of that, it was all about threads of connection and really bringing it into our lived reality and what do we notice. So we were very much encouraged to build threads of connection with a tree, a bird, a plant. And yes, similar for you, you're stripping back. You don't need to know the Latin and all the biology behind it. It's very much like, what do you see on your daily basis? What tree do you pass? And give it a name and get to know it, form a relationship with it. Because when you're building these threads of connection, then actually it is building connections with your place, with your environment, with your home, and ultimately with yourself. So it's kind of that coming home to self and discovery. And this perfectly segues into another resource that you have created. You're such a creator. And again, having these resources, it's beyond yourself. So you're reaching more people. And in a way, that's why Alex and I and Paul have this podcast, so we can expand our reach and hopefully inspire more people other than just working one-to-one. So we would love to know a little bit about your inner and outer nature self-discovery card pack. And again, I'm going to quote here, where you are drawing on the metaphors and lessons that are abundant in nature, plants and trees. The questions bring an organic invitation to your musings and inner reflections. So yeah, a little insight, maybe a couple of teaser questions for people. That would be amazing.
Well, these cards, the inner and outer nature self-discovery card deck, came out of my work with groups, particularly groups of women on retreats and on workshops and on programs. And it was really rooted in an exercise that I used to do way back around bringing in metaphors. So really thinking about the metaphors that are very common and known to a lot of people around nature. So words like storm or rooted or anchored or harvesting, just really playing on the very wide range of metaphors that are located in nature and turning those into a quest. So when I go out for a walk, I'm always thinking about, first of all, how do I ground myself when I'm on a walk? Well, I find that simply breathing, slowing down my breath, aware of my footsteps, that's what grounds me. The more I walk, the more grounded I become. And then I will often hold a question, like a quest, that I am either walking with or it emerges as I am walking. And I used to, back in the days, take that question to the tree that I mentioned at the beginning of this our conversation today, which is an oak tree at the top of Brockwell Park called Sanctuary. And so the idea of the inner and outer nature self-discovery card deck is that you've got 49 questions. You've got 8 different themes, from seed to wisdom to root to growth to nature to bloom. And all of these questions offer a different entry point into looking at a question that you might be holding, a problem or a challenge. But what I found was there's one particular question in this deck that almost every time I use it, regardless of the groups that I'm using it with, people just seem to reach a very deep place. It brings up really interesting, different perspectives. And that question was around a tree. And it always gets the same response. And it's something around, what advice would a wise ancient tree have to give you about your current challenge? If I just share that question in a group, before I know it, everyone's heads down and they're just kind of writing, journaling. People that don't journal, people that have not, don't even use a pen to do handwriting. So many of us are just on our computers nowadays. And what I've realized is it just takes people to a different place. They access different parts of themselves. And people have fed back to me that they take these prompts. I deliberately wanted them to be small. So you could just tuck it into the page of a notebook, you could tuck it into your pocket, you could pull it out when you're out in nature, and you could just use this as a jumping off point. Where the writing takes you is completely where the writing wants to go. But nature, I feel, is such a great backdrop for us to do a kind of inner, kind of come from outside to the inside. And I know I needed this kind of stimulus for myself as well.
Talking about the connection piece, honestly, you're tugging on my heartstrings here, Jackee. You really are. Some of the things that you're saying are just really kind of making memories pop up. But talking about connection and things like that in trees, in where I used to live when I grew up, there was a big apple tree, and it turned out, I did a lot of research, and it turned out the area we lived in used to be a massive orchard that belonged to the big stately home that was long, long gone. And we had the last remaining apple tree in our garden. And I spent most of my childhood up that apple tree, sitting in it, reading books and just hiding in the leaves and and I told my husband this story before we got married, and we had a pagan hand fasting, and the apple tree is in our wedding rings, and it was in our pagan wedding rings as well. And it was my husband's idea. And so I wear that apple tree
Yeah,
all day, and it's with me all the time now. And it's just, I find myself kind of holding on to it if I have a question to ask myself, or if I, have some
yeah,
musings of my own. And
yeah,
I think what you're saying, that ancient wisdom, I often think to myself, when I was younger, if I had, if I was emotional, or if I had a question, or if anything, I'd go and sit in that tree and I'd
yeah,
talk to the tree. And it's
yeah,
just it's just brought back a lot of those memories of just, what would the tree say if I was sitting in the tree now on my one particular bough of this tree that I used to sit on? What would the tree tell me? Um, and that connection is so strong. And I think if people don't have that connection, they should, really start to think about where would they find that connection for themselves, because it will be there somewhere. There'll be a connection to something, to a part of nature, or they
yeah.
should go and find it, go and make those connections. Just
And
it's really inspiring. And the questions on your card there, I just love that. I love that question. But yeah, just what would an ancient tree, what wisdom would an ancient tree give you? I just think it's phenomenal. So
could I add something
of
there?
course, yeah, please.
Robert Macfarlane, a few years back, I came across a question that he poses. I can't remember which of his books, but he says, "What does this place know of you that you do not know of yourself?
Mm.
And what do you know of yourself? Of what is known to you of yourself when you are in this place?" Something around that. But that it's the heart of that question that I recognize is what the kind of nature-based work that we are all doing here on the Coaching Outdoor podcast, that is at the heart of the work that I'm doing with groups and with people. It's the work that I feel you and Anne-Marie are both doing.
Mm.
And I've forgotten the other person.
Paul.
Oh, sorry, I've forgotten. Yeah, Paul, just his name just went out of my head. Sorry, it's the work that you are all doing here with your teams and your clients, remembering who we are and finding ways. And I think nature is very generous to us in having this as a creative form of expression, of being able to bring nature in this way as a creative tool and resource. But I also feel that it has given me a much deeper appreciation of thinking about the environment, the space that I live in, how that space is, taking care of the space. It also, I'm always thinking about the whole area of climate change and how we can be more engaged with that. And I think it often starts with noticing what is around us in our own back gardens, in our own localities. That is a really good place to start.
And again, your segues really well into our next question is, how do we encourage more people to experience that outdoor and that connection with nature in the world of coaching, whether it's more coaches taking their practice outside, or whether it's more clients who are, wanting to experience that and engage with the outside world and nature. How can we, what would you recommend? What kind of things would you suggest for us to encourage more people to get outside?
First of all, I think a really good starting place to start with ourselves, to think about our own nature-based practices, our own walking practices, because when we can really embody them for ourselves, we're going to be more confident about bringing those into our work with our clients. So I think we can really there's so many resources around that we can draw from as coaches and supervisors. So I think that's a really good place to start. And then one of the things that I feel really works is I like to start with nature inside the coaching room. So that's why I have the prompts and I have questions and I have kind of creative resources and creative tools, because I want to bring those questions into the coaching conversations that then encourages more people to go outside. But equally, I don't want us to be put off from bringing nature in by thinking that you have to start outside. I've been following Street Wisdom. I don't know if you know Street Wisdom, started by David Pearls. I mean, his work is fantastic. I love his book, Wonderful. And I love the rhythms that they use for their Street Wisdom events, which is tune up, quest, and then share. But you're also bringing out the wisdom from it. And so it's really about thinking about how you can incorporate those in, but also you can use your cameras on your phone. I have a client who she steps out into a garden often in the middle of our coaching, and she can join on Zoom and turn her phone around, and I can see her in her garden. And she can talk about what she's experiencing as she's walking in her garden. So I think the more that we can share creative ways of being out in nature and how we can bring that into our coaching work without it feeling awkward, and that it can become a place that we feel more confident in, more comfortable with. It's like play. I get to play, I get to walk with people um, when I bring in nature. So I think those are some of the ways. And I would also tell the sharing of stories, Alex, hearing your story today, all the connections, Anne-Marie, that you're making with the whole conversation that we're having. It's like having more of these conversations and also writing and speaking about the work that we're doing. I think that's the way that we kind of plant the different seeds that's kind of engaging people more in this work. And it is a growing movement, and I love it.
Mm.
Absolutely love it.
Me too. And I think I dare I say it on behalf of Alex, us too. And that's
Yeah,
very much why our passion project started
yeah,
3.5 years ago, and it's just grown beyond our wildest
beautiful.
dreams.
It's
Like,
beautiful.
who knew? Who knew? And I mean, yeah, I'd love to circle back and just really highlight street wisdom. And
Yeah,
anyone who's listening in, if it's not something that you've been an experience, I'd really, really encourage. I arrived in the UK in 2015, having lived overseas for 6 years. So I arrived fresh-faced from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Never lived in the Southwest before. And actually, I attended a couple of street wisdom events, one in Bath and then one in Frome, which were beautifully facilitated and just really helped me ground into the space and place in a really different way. Both were in urban areas, and
yeah,
actually seeking out just little snippets of taking photographs. And I've still got on my phone a leaf that I took and a clock face that had no hands.
yeah,
And both of them just really encapsulated where I was at that time, which was 9 years ago. It was that possibility and that growth. And then also how the clock that tells no time, and just what is
yeah.
time and how do we position ourselves in relationship to it. So no, Street Wisdom is an amazing, amazing initiative, and held all around the world.
Beautiful.
Um, yeah.
It really is. And the book, wonderful. Um, I've been following them for a long time, and I've always wanted to do a street wisdom event, but just never made the time to do it. I mean, also host one myself, but I went on one recently, and like you said, Anne-Marie, I can so agree with you. It was great. But I want to recommend this book. Honestly, it is beautifully written. The detail, the wisdom in this book. If you want to start anywhere, start with Tree Wisdom by Jacqueline Memory Patterson. It's a great book that gives you insight into the different trees, particularly the apple tree, which I just loved your story, Alex. It was wonderful. But this book I would highly recommend. And I don't know if we can talk about books now. Can we talk about?
Go for it. You've said we've just kind of like naturally flowed into the
Yeah.
resources piece, so we might as well just roll with it.
Well, look, I just love books. My house is full of books, nature books. I'm never not interested in reading a book about nature. I do actually have a book list of nature inspired books, which I've put on LinkedIn before, and I can definitely share that with you. But I would like to recommend this book, The Well Gardened Mind by Stuart Smith. Look, if you looked inside this book, every other page is dog-eared. She goes into all of the therapeutic benefits of being out in nature. It's full of stories and case studies about the work that she's done, not in a coaching context, but in a range of different contexts, in terms of working in charities, working in prisons. Um, and this really gives you a solid grounding in understanding and appreciating the therapeutic benefits of being out in nature. And then the other book that I would also recommend is Wintering by Catherine May, but also her book Enchantment. Wintering is around transitions. It's really helpful in terms of clients who are experiencing burnout, exhaustion, because it really speaks to transitions and slowing down. And I think that there is just I think there's a lot that we as coaches and supervisors can do by going into narrative nonfiction work, because I think it will really enhance the quality of our work and our understanding and appreciation of this growing field of nature journaling, nature therapy, ecopsychology, just whatever terms you want to give to it. And then I do have a number of essays in a number of anthologies, including Inside Creative Coaching, the Big Book of Journaling. But they are such rich resources for creative resources and tools for us really bringing this work into fruition. And I think I'd just like to leave with a something I forgot to speak about, which is part of my daily practice. In my journal, every morning I wake up, I look up outside my bedroom window and I write a description of the sky. I describe the color of the sky, the energy of the sky. I got this practice from reading Julia Cameron's work. I'm a real advocate of her work. And she had a book called Sound of Paper that she wrote many years ago. And at the beginning of each chapter, she used to write a description of the sky. Now, what it's done for me is that it means that I become really present to the moment. And I often start a lot of workshops with getting people to describe what they're seeing outside their window. And it's a way of bringing nature in. And it really, really does work. And it helps clients. So whether you're doing a one-to-one, you're doing a group, you're doing a team, my weather in, weather out, that is my way of doing a weather forecast. And then it's often easier for people to, once they've done the sort of use the metaphors around the weather, they've gone in through the senses to kind of smells or taste or shapes or patterns. They've got really imaginative with color. It's often easy to then segue into your emotional weather forecast. What are some of the emotions? What are some of the feelings? What's going on in your body? It's almost like taking a walk from the outside and then you're walking inside. And I use that to help people get present.
I love that with the weather as well. I have a real connection with the weather. The weather is
Yeah.
where I live, I see the weather coming. And when you literally can see three rainbows coming down a lock at you because you're in the dry and the sun and the rain is coming your way and they're literally moving along the
Wow.
water in front of you, it's just,
Yeah.
it is awe-inspiring. It is literally
Yeah.
mind-blowing when you see things like that. And, you know, people don't necessarily stop and look up. And I love that, just looking up at the sky. I spend most of my life looking at the sky. We were very lucky to have the aurora playing really, really clearly a couple of months ago. And it was just, I was
Yeah.
outside for hours just looking at the sky. Um, Jackee, honestly, the amount of stuff you've shared on this podcast, and we've only had you for 45 minutes or so, hour. There's just so much more we could talk to you about. There's just you've inspired me. You've brought back some wonderful memories for me just in this short time we've had with you, and I really appreciate that, and thank you, because it's a great way to start the morning. And I'm actually looking at the sky now and I'm thinking, how would I describe the sky right now? And I'm going to go away and do that
Lovely.
after we've finished recording today.
Yeah.
um so just where can people get in touch with you? Because I know there's going to be a lot of people wanting to connect with you if they haven't done already. So where can people get in touch with you and connect with you after they've listened to or watched the podcast?
Well, you can definitely connect with me on my website, which is my name, Jackee, Jackee Holder, Holder, jackieholder.com. There's a lot of free resources on there. People send me messages, email me there. So that's a really good place to find me. And on social media, if you really want to find out what I'm up to, what's going on in my life, I'm very open, very honest, very transparent on Instagram at Jackee Holder Inspires. Sometimes I post my walks. I'll often share events that I'm doing or that are coming up. And also for women, we host a online women's writing journaling circle every Tuesday morning from 7 till 8:30. That's a free event that the link is in my on my link on my Instagram page, so you can definitely find me there. And I'm really working hard on becoming more present on LinkedIn, trying to share more of what I'm doing there because I recognize that there's a huge community there. And that's a really good place or great place to connect with like-minded walkers, nature lovers, coaching outdoor podcast audiences. So that's also a place where I'm bringing myself more to, I'm taking more of a walk over to LinkedIn as well.
And the LinkedIn world as well. I know when we started the podcast, Alex had this mission to get hashtag outdoor coaching starting to be recognized.
Yeah.
And it's just, I get, we're in a little bit of an echo chamber, and I do see a lot of posts from outdoor nature connected coaches now. And there has been such a growth within this area. And every guest and every future guest and every listener, like, you are a part of this movement,
Yeah.
part of this change. And the LinkedIn world and our perceptions to it, and oh, it's business, or it's corporate.
Yeah.
And actually, just by posting something, and I shared one a couple of days ago about some work I'd done with one of my coach supervisees on a beautiful old Iron Age fort down in Wiltshire, and talking about ancestral connection. And actually,
Yeah.
you were talking very succinctly about the wisdom of trees and actually the wisdom of our ancestors. And I think
Yeah.
for me as a coach, 10 years ago, would I've been sharing on LinkedIn about a supervision session connecting to the wisdom of our ancestors? I'm like, not a chance. Whereas now, and it takes a bit of courage and a bit of being open and sharing what is going on, and hopefully others will then do the same. And I do see it more. So yes, I've recently connected with you on Instagram, and yeah, hopefully more of our posts will kind of connect and pop up on the LinkedIn world as well.
Thank you so much for personalizing LinkedIn, because I feel like sometimes I need to keep some of the kind of different practices that I do. They're okay for Instagram, but they're not okay for LinkedIn. And that's really, really helpful. And I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you bringing in the ancestral connection there, Anne-Marie, because that was a big part of where this work started. And this final piece for me is that when I used to run a program called Face to Face, and we used to go into Brockwell Park, like I mentioned, and do the opening kind of rhythm and ritual of this weekend retreat that I used to run, we used to open with a practice which was from the West African tradition, the Yoruba tradition of pouring libation, which is getting a kind of special vessel and pouring water onto the earth in a space of reverence and thanking the earth. It was like an earth blessing. And it's deeply connected to our ancestors' reverence and gratitude for Mother Nature, for the earth. It's where Carnival comes from. Carnival is a celebration of harvest time, of what nature gives us of the earth. So actually what we're doing in coaching and supervision is we are bringing back a lot of the old ways into modern times. And then they're bringing in what Catherine May, and I'm going to pronounce this completely wrong. You can look it up, but I think she calls it hierophany, which is about savoring ritual. We need to return to ritual. When you go to that old fort in Wiltshire, it's a ritual that you are walking through with your client. And the more we are connected and the more we are swamped by the digital world around us, the more we need to get back into those rituals. And there's no better way than through nature. So thank you.
And thank you, a big, big thank you for taking the time. It has been an absolute pleasure. And I'm sure this is not the end of the conversation. I'm sure there will
There's so
be
much more to talk about. I feel like we were just warming up. I really do. And I love that, there was so much spaciousness in the conversation. I really appreciate that, because it's almost like it's a model for what it is like when we're out in nature. We're slowing down. We're allowing ourselves to kind of listen and hear and receive what each other is saying. And I hope that will also be experienced by those who get to listen to the podcast. I've loved speaking to you both. Really have.
I'm sure it will. And for the listener, what are your thoughts? What are your takeaways? What really, really catches your attention? We would love to know. Please do message, pop a comment in LinkedIn, reach out to Jackee and tell her directly what really resonated for you, and what do you want more of as well. What other topics, what other guests? This podcast is very much for you, the listener. We are here in service for you, to inspire you. So please do let us know. And thank you, dear listener, for your time, taking the time out of your day, whatever you are doing. You might be walking, you might be driving, you might be cooking. Thank you for choosing to listen to the podcast. And if you have enjoyed it, it would be an amazing favor if you maybe liked or rated it. It gives us more reach. Or tell a friend, tell a colleague, so that they can become a listener as well. And just a little plug. We first met Jackee at our Coaching Outdoors podcast live at Henley, which happened in July 24. And I am currently en route for a meeting, which is exciting because plans are afoot for 2025. The dates have been released. It is Thursday the 19th and Friday the 20th. So it's a 2-day event. You asked, we listened. So get that in the diary. And tickets, when you listen into this podcast, will be on sale. And the early bird price should still be there. I can't promise, but it should still be there. So please do come along and join us and meet in person, and come and have conversations with myself and Alex and Jackee in person. That would be absolutely amazing. So that is it from me for today. Have an amazing day wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is, and look forward to catching you on another episode in the future.
Thank you.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard, like it, share across your network, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast. Thanks so much in advance for your support.